You will not believe what happens to the girl at the end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue writing stories like this one. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
The stagecoach rattled to a halt, spitting dust and gravel as it deposited Hannah and her meager belongings in the small, rough-hewn town of Hope's Crossing, Idaho. Hope's Crossing wasn't much of a town at all. It was more like a collection of ramshackle buildings clinging to the edge of the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Swallowing her apprehension, Hannah clutched her small satchel containing the carefully folded letters from her intended, Caleb. Each letter had painted a picture of a strong, kind man eager to share his life and home. It was a promise she desperately needed. Leaving behind the crowded tenements of New York City, Hannah had invested all her hopes in this new beginning. She stepped down from the stagecoach, her gaze sweeping the muddy street, searching for a familiar face. A tall, lanky man detached himself from the small group gathered near the general store. He approached Hannah with a hesitant gait, removing his hat and twisting it nervously in his hands. "Miss Hannah," he inquired, his voice laced with a somber tone. Hannah straightened her shoulders, a flicker of anticipation in her eyes. "Yes, I am Hannah. Are you Caleb?" The man's face fell. "I'm afraid I have some terrible news, Miss Hannah. I'm Jedediah, Caleb's brother. There was a flood. It swept through these parts a few weeks back. Caleb, he didn't make it." The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. The color drained from her face, and the satchel slipped from her numb fingers, landing with a soft thud in the dust. Caleb, the man she had never met but whose words had given her so much hope, was gone. Her carefully constructed dreams shattered into a million pieces. Jedediah, seeing her distress, rushed to her side, offering a comforting hand. "I'm so sorry, Miss Hannah. Caleb spoke of you often. He was so excited for you to arrive." But Hannah barely heard him. The shock was too profound. She was stranded, alone, in a strange and unforgiving land, with no money, no prospects, and no hope. The paper promise that had carried her across the country had turned to ash in her hands, leaving her utterly devastated. Her journey to find happiness had ended before it even began. The initial shock began to give way to a cold, gnawing fear. Jedediah, still by her side, cleared his throat. "Miss Hannah," he said gently, "I know this is a terrible time. Caleb left instructions. He wanted me to see you were taken care of." Taken care of? The words echoed hollowly in Hannah's mind. What did that even mean now? Jedediah continued, "He left you his cabin. It's small but sturdy. And he left some money at the general store for your upkeep. A cabin. Alone. In the middle of nowhere." The thought was terrifying. Hannah had grown up in the city, surrounded by people, noise, and the constant hum of life. The idea of being isolated in the vast, untamed wilderness was overwhelming. I don't know anything about living in the wilderness," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to hunt or build a fire or even protect myself." Jedediah nodded understandingly. "It's not easy. But you're a strong woman, Miss Hannah. I can see it in your eyes. And the people of Hope's Crossing will help you. We look out for each other." He offered to take her to the cabin, and Hannah numbly agreed. The cabin was a small, one-room structure nestled deep in the woods, a considerable distance from the town. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. As Jedediah showed her around, pointing out the well, the woodpile, and the rudimentary cooking stove, Hannah's anxiety grew. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. Jedediah, sensing her unease, said, "I should be going now. But I'll check in on you tomorrow, make sure you're all right." As he rode off, the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the distance, Hannah was left alone. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The wilderness pressed in on her, a dark and unknown entity. Fear coiled in her stomach, cold and sharp. She was utterly alone, and the daunting reality of her situation crashed down upon her. Survival in this place would be a challenge unlike anything she had ever faced. The first night was the hardest. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle in the undergrowth sent shivers down Hannah's spine. She barricaded the door with a rickety chair, huddled under a thin quilt, and prayed for morning. Sleep was fitful and filled with nightmares of shadowy figures and unseen dangers lurking just beyond the cabin walls. The next day, Jedediah returned as promised. He brought with him a basket of food and a kind-faced woman named Martha who offered to teach Hannah some basic survival skills. Martha showed her how to build a fire, how to identify edible plants, and how to use the rifle Caleb had left behind. But even with Martha's help, Hannah felt hopelessly inadequate. She struggled to light the fire, constantly pricking her fingers on the kindling. The plants all looked the same to her, and the rifle felt heavy and unwieldy in her hands. The wilderness seemed determined to reject her. One afternoon, while attempting to gather firewood, Hannah wandered further into the woods than she intended. The trees grew taller and denser, blocking out the sunlight. Panic began to set in as she realized she was lost. She called out for help, but her voice was swallowed by the vastness of the forest. Just as despair threatened to engulf her, she heard a snapping twig. A figure emerged from the trees, a tall, weathered man with piercing blue eyes and a thick, untamed beard. He wore buckskin clothing and carried a long rifle. He looked like he was made of the wilderness itself. He regarded her with a silent, assessing gaze. "Lost, are you?" he finally grunted, his voice rough as stone. Hannah, relief flooding through her, nodded frantically. "Yes. I don't know how to get back to the cabin." The man sighed, a puff of white in the cool air. "Name's Silas," he said gruffly. "I'll take you back. But you need to learn to pay attention to your surroundings. The woods ain't kind to those who don't respect them." Silas led her back to the cabin, his movements sure and steady. He didn't speak much, but Hannah sensed a deep understanding of the wilderness in him. As they reached the cabin, Hannah felt a flicker of something other than fear, a spark of hope. Perhaps, with Silas's help, she could learn to survive in this wild and unforgiving land. This chance encounter might be the key to her survival. The wilderness, it seemed, had offered her a lifeline in the form of a taciturn trapper. Silas lingered outside the cabin, his gaze fixed on the surrounding woods. Hannah, emboldened by his presence, found her voice. "Mr. Silas," she began hesitantly, I don't know what to do. I can't survive out here on my own. Martha is kind, but she has her own family to care for." Silas turned, his blue eyes sharp and unwavering. "You're asking for help." It wasn't a question. Hannah nodded, her cheeks flushing. "Yes. I know it's a lot to ask, but is there any way you could teach me? Show me how to live here." Silas considered her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He was a man of few words, his life spent in the solitude of the wilderness. Taking on a city woman seemed an unimaginable disruption. But he saw the desperation in her eyes, the raw fear that mirrored his own when he first came to these woods, running from a past he couldn't outrun. "I need someone to tend to the cabin," he said finally, his voice gruff. "Keep it clean, cook meals. I'm gone trapping for days at a time." Hannah's heart leaped. "I can do that. I may not know much about the wilderness, but I know how to keep a house." Silas grunted. "It ain't a fancy house. And the cooking, you'll have to learn to make do with what's available." "I'm willing to learn anything," Hannah declared, her voice firm. "Anything at all." Silas nodded once, a decisive movement. "All right, I'll teach you. But you listen to me. You do what I say. No questions." "I will," Hannah promised, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Mr. Silas. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Silas said, a hint of a warning in his voice. "This ain't going to be easy. The wilderness, it tests you. It breaks you. But if you're willing to work hard, you just might survive." And so an unlikely bargain was struck. Hannah, the city-bred mail-order bride, and Silas, the taciturn trapper, entered into an agreement that would change both their lives forever. Hannah would provide a home, and Silas would provide the knowledge and protection she needed to survive. It was a practical arrangement, born out of necessity, but beneath the surface a new promise was stirring, a promise of hope, of companionship, and perhaps something more. The first few days were a trial by fire. Silas was a demanding teacher, his patience as rough-hewn as the cabin walls. He showed Hannah how to chop wood, his strong arms swinging the axe with effortless precision. Hannah, on the other hand, struggled to lift the heavy axe, her swings clumsy and ineffective. He taught her how to set snares, how to track animals, and how to skin a rabbit, a task that made Hannah's stomach churn. Inside the cabin, Hannah fared slightly better, but even there, challenges abounded. The stove was temperamental, the water was cold, and the supplies were limited. She learned to make bread from coarse flour, to stew whatever vegetables she could find, and to stretch the meager meat rations as far as possible. Their interactions were terse and practical. Silas would issue instructions, and Hannah would follow them to the best of her ability. There was little conversation, no laughter, and no shared stories. Silas remained a closed book, his emotions hidden behind a wall of gruffness. Hannah, accustomed to the polite chatter and social graces of city life, found Silas's silence unsettling. She tried to engage him in conversation, asking about his past, his life in the wilderness, but he would deflect her questions with a curt response or a grunt. One evening, as Hannah was preparing a meager stew, she accidentally dropped a pot of water, splashing it across the dirt floor. Silas, who was sharpening his knife by the fire, looked up, his eyes narrowed. "Clumsy," he muttered. "You need to be more careful. Water's precious." Hannah's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, grabbing a rag to mop up the mess. "I didn't mean to." Silas watched her in silence for a moment, then sighed. Just be more mindful. Everything out here has a purpose. Nothing's wasted. As Hannah cleaned up the spill, she couldn't help but feel discouraged. She was trying her best, but it seemed nothing she did was good enough. She missed the familiar comforts of the city, the friendly faces, and the easy conversation. But she knew she couldn't go back. Her only hope was to learn to adapt to this new life, to earn Silas's respect, and to find a way to survive in the unforgiving wilderness. The initial agreement was in place, but building a life upon it felt like an insurmountable task. Despite the awkwardness, a rhythm began to develop. Hannah learned to anticipate Silas's needs, to have the fire burning when he returned from trapping, to have a hot meal waiting on the table. She even started to understand his grunts and gestures, deciphering his unspoken instructions. Silas, in turn, began to tolerate Hannah's presence. He no longer corrected her every mistake, and occasionally he even offered a word of encouragement. He noticed how diligently she worked, how she never complained, and how she always tried her best, even when she failed. One cold morning, as Hannah was struggling to start a fire with damp kindling, Silas watched her for a moment, then stepped in and took over. With a few swift movements, he arranged the wood and coaxed a flame to life. "You need to dry the kindling better," he said, his voice less harsh than usual. "Keep it in a dry place, near the stove." Hannah watched him, her eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you, Silas," she said softly. He grunted in response, but Hannah saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of warmth, perhaps even kindness. As the days turned into weeks, Hannah began to feel a sense of accomplishment. She was learning to survive in the wilderness, to provide for herself, and to contribute to the household. She was still a city girl at heart, but she was slowly transforming into something more, a resourceful, resilient woman capable of facing the challenges of the wild. One evening, after a particularly long and tiring day, Hannah and Silas sat in silence by the fire. Hannah was mending a tear in Silas's buckskin shirt, her fingers moving deftly over the fabric. Silas was sharpening his knife, the rhythmic scrape of metal against stone filling the small cabin. Suddenly, Silas spoke, his voice low and hesitant. You're doing good, Hannah." Hannah looked up, surprised. It was the most praise she had ever received from him. A small smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Silas. I'm trying." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the knife. "It ain't easy. This life, it's hard." "I know," Hannah said quietly. "But I'm learning." And in that moment, a connection was forged, a silent understanding between two people from different worlds, brought together by circumstance and bound by the shared struggle for survival. The awkwardness hadn't vanished, but it was lessening, replaced by a fragile sense of mutual respect and a growing, unspoken bond. One crisp autumn afternoon, Silas announced that they needed to replenish their dwindling meat supply. He decided to take Hannah with him on a hunting trip, a test of her skills and a chance to venture further into the wilderness. They set out early, the air biting cold, the forest floor carpeted with fallen leaves. Silas led the way, his movements silent and purposeful. Hannah struggled to keep up, her breath coming in ragged gasps. As they moved deeper into the woods, Silas pointed out animal tracks, teaching Hannah how to distinguish between different species. He showed her how to read the signs of the forest, how to anticipate the movements of the animals. Suddenly, Silas stopped, holding up a hand. He pointed to a thicket of bushes. "Deer," he whispered. "Buck. Big one." Silas handed Hannah the rifle, his eyes fixed on the bushes. "You take the shot," he said. "Aim true." Hannah's heart pounded in her chest. She had practiced with the rifle, but she had never fired it at a living creature. She raised the rifle, her hands trembling. She peered through the sights, trying to focus on the bushes. Suddenly, a large buck burst from the thicket, its antlers gleaming in the sunlight. Hannah froze, her mind blank. She couldn't pull the trigger. Just as the buck was about to disappear into the trees, a mountain lion leaped from a nearby branch, landing on the deer's back. The two animals crashed to the ground in a flurry of fur and claws. Silas reacted instantly, raising his rifle and firing a shot. The mountain lion released the deer and turned towards Silas, its eyes blazing with fury. Silas motioned for Hannah to stay behind him. The mountain lion stalked towards them, its muscles tense, its teeth bared. Hannah knew they were in grave danger. This was no longer a hunting trip. It was a fight for survival. Silas fired again, but the mountain lion dodged the shot, its movements lightning fast. It lunged at Silas, its claws extended. Silas sidestepped the attack, but the mountain lion's claws caught his arm, tearing through his buckskin shirt and drawing blood. Without thinking, Hannah grabbed a large branch from the ground and charged towards the mountain lion. screaming at the top of her lungs. The mountain lion, startled by her sudden appearance, hesitated for a moment. That was all the time Silas needed. He raised his knife and plunged it into the mountain lion's chest. The animal collapsed to the ground, its body twitching. Hannah and Silas stood there, panting, their bodies trembling. The adrenaline coursed through their veins. They had faced death together and they had survived. In that moment, their bond deepened, forged in the crucible of shared danger. Back at the cabin, Hannah tended to Silas's wounds, her hands gentle as she cleaned the gashes on his arm and stitched them closed with a needle and thread. Silas watched her, his gaze intense and unwavering. "You were brave," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved my life." Hannah shook her head. "We saved each other," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "If you hadn't been there." The unspoken words hung in the air. They both knew how close they had come to death. As Hannah bandaged his arm, she noticed a faded scar on his wrist. Curiosity overcame her usual reticence. "What happened there?" she asked, pointing to the scar. Silas hesitated, his expression clouding over. He rarely spoke about his past, but something in Hannah's eyes, a genuine concern, a quiet understanding, compelled him to open up. "It was a long time ago," he said, his voice low, "before I came to these woods." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was a soldier, fought in the war." Hannah knew little about the war, but she sensed the pain and trauma that still haunted him. "What happened?" she asked gently. Silas sighed, his gaze drifting towards the fire. "I saw things I can't forget. Things that changed me." He closed his eyes for a moment as if reliving the horrors of the past. "I lost my brother in the war. We were fighting side by side when he was shot. I never forgave myself for not being able to save him." Hannah reached out and gently touched his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. "I'm so sorry, Silas," she said softly. "It wasn't your fault." Silas opened his eyes, his gaze meeting hers. He saw in her eyes a compassion and understanding he had not seen in a long time. "I ran away after the war," he confessed. "I couldn't face my family, my friends. I couldn't face myself. I came to these woods to be alone, to forget." "But you can't forget," Hannah said quietly. "You can only learn to live with it." Silas nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on Hannah's face. He had never shared his past with anyone, but he felt a strange sense of comfort in confiding in her. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who had also experienced loss and hardship, someone who understood the pain of a broken heart. In that moment, Hannah realized that Silas was not just a gruff trapper, he was a wounded soul, haunted by the ghosts of his past. And she too was carrying her own burdens, her own scars. They were two broken people, finding solace and companionship in each other's presence. The wilderness had brought them together, but it was their shared pain and their growing connection that would ultimately heal them. The shared vulnerability opened a new chapter in their relationship. Silas, no longer just the stern protector, revealed glimpses of the man beneath the hardened exterior. Hannah, in turn, found herself drawn to his quiet strength and the hidden depths of his soul. One day, Hannah discovered a small, hand-carved wooden bird tucked away in a drawer. It was exquisitely detailed, a testament to the skill of the craftsman. "Did you make this?" she asked Silas, holding up the bird. Silas's cheeks flushed slightly. "A long time ago," he mumbled. "Before the war. I used to carve things." "It's beautiful," Hannah said, admiring the delicate details. "You're very talented." Silas shrugged, but Hannah saw a flicker of pride in his eyes. "I haven't done it in years," he said. "No time." Hannah encouraged him to take it up again, reminding him of the joy it seemed to bring him. Slowly, Silas began to carve again, whittling small figures from scraps of wood in his spare time. The act of creation seemed to soothe his troubled mind, bringing him a measure of peace. Hannah also discovered Silas's kindness towards animals. She often saw him leaving scraps of food for the squirrels and birds, and she once witnessed him gently tending to an injured fox. He never spoke about it, but his actions spoke volumes. As Hannah learned more about Silas, she began to understand the reasons behind his solitary life. He was not simply a gruff loner, he was a man who had been deeply wounded by life, who had sought refuge in the wilderness to escape his pain. The loss of his brother, the horrors of war, the guilt and the grief, all had contributed to his decision to isolate himself from the world. But Hannah's presence was slowly changing him. Her warmth and compassion were melting the ice around his heart, allowing him to reconnect with his humanity. She was showing him that it was possible to find joy and connection even after experiencing profound loss. The wilderness had been his sanctuary, but Hannah was becoming his salvation. She was helping him to heal, to forgive himself, and to open his heart to the possibility of love again. The discovery of his hidden talents and kindness revealed a depth of character that drew Hannah even closer. As the days grew shorter and the nights grew colder, Silas found himself increasingly grateful for Hannah's presence in his life. The cabin, once a lonely refuge, now felt like a home. The silence, once a comforting solitude, now felt empty without her voice. He observed her quiet strength as she faced the challenges of wilderness living, her unwavering spirit as she learned new skills, and her boundless compassion as she cared for him and the animals. He admired her resilience, her ability to find joy in the simple things, and her unwavering optimism in the face of adversity. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, Silas watched Hannah as she sat by the fire, mending his clothes. The firelight danced on her face, casting a warm glow on her gentle features. He realized how much he had come to depend on her, not just for her practical skills, but for her companionship and her unwavering support. He missed her when she was gone, even for a short time. He found himself looking forward to her stories, her laughter, and her presence. He even started to anticipate her needs, offering her help with chores before she had to ask. He noticed the small things she did to make the cabin more comfortable, the colorful wildflowers she gathered from the meadow, the hand-stitched curtains she hung in the windows, the small carvings she placed on the shelves. These small touches transformed the cabin from a Spartan shelter into a warm and inviting home. Silas also realized that Hannah had brought a sense of purpose back into his life. Before she arrived, he had simply been existing, going through the motions, waiting for the end to come. But now he had someone to care for, someone to protect, someone to share his life with. He felt a renewed sense of responsibility, a desire to make her happy, and a hope for the future that he had not felt in many years. He still struggled to express his feelings, his words often coming out gruff and awkward. But Hannah seemed to understand his unspoken language, reading his heart through his actions and his gaze. He knew that he was falling in love with her. He tried to fight it, to deny it, to convince himself that it was just gratitude and companionship. But the feelings were too strong, too overwhelming. He could no longer deny the truth. Hannah had brought light and warmth back into his isolated existence, and he was forever changed because of her. The transformation was subtle but profound as Silas recognized the invaluable gift of Hannah's presence in his life. As winter tightened its icy grip on the wilderness, the days grew shorter and the nights grew longer. Hannah and Silas found themselves spending more and more time inside the cabin. The close quarters intensified their feelings for each other, but also amplified their anxieties about expressing them. Hannah, raised in a world of courtship and propriety, struggled to reconcile her growing affection for Silas with the unconventional circumstances of their relationship. She admired his strength, his kindness, and his unwavering loyalty, but she also feared rejection and the possibility of disrupting the delicate balance they had established. Silas, burdened by his past and his inability to articulate his emotions, found himself wrestling with conflicting desires. He longed to tell Hannah how he felt, to express the gratitude and the love that filled his heart. But he was afraid of scaring her away, of revealing the depths of his wounded soul, and of shattering the fragile peace he had found in her presence. The unspoken feelings hung heavy in the air, creating a palpable tension between them. They stole glances at each other across the cabin, their eyes meeting for fleeting moments before quickly darting away. They lingered near each other, their bodies almost touching, but always maintaining a respectful distance. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Hannah reached out and gently touched Silas's hand. He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and longing. "Silas," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "I." Before she could finish her sentence, a loud knock echoed through the cabin. Silas's hand instinctively tightened around Hannah's, then quickly released it. He stood up, his expression hardening. "Who is it?" he barked, his voice gruff. A voice called out from the other side of the door. "It's Jedediah, Silas. I need to talk to you." Silas hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. Jedediah stepped inside, his face grim. He looked from Silas to Hannah, his eyes filled with concern. "There's trouble brewing," Jedediah said, his voice low. "A group of men are heading this way. They're looking for gold, and they're not afraid to use violence to get it." Silas's jaw tightened. "How close are they?" he asked. "They'll be here by morning," Jedediah replied. "You need to be prepared." The news shattered the fragile intimacy between Hannah and Silas, replacing it with a sense of urgency and fear. The outside threat forced them to confront a new challenge, pushing their unspoken feelings to the background as they prepared to defend their home and their lives. The approaching winter mirrored the growing tension and the unacknowledged emotions between them. The news of the approaching men cast a long shadow over the cabin. Silas, his face grim, began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. He barricaded the windows, sharpened his knives, and loaded his rifles. He instructed Hannah to hide in the root cellar if the men broke into the cabin. Hannah, however, refused to be relegated to the role of a helpless victim. "I can fight," she declared, her voice firm. "I can use a rifle. I won't hide." Silas hesitated. He didn't want to put her in danger, but he also knew that she was strong and resourceful. "All right," he conceded, "but you listen to me. You do exactly as I say. No heroics." As they prepared for the attack, a simmering tension began to rise between them. Silas's gruffness returned, his protective instincts overriding his ability to express his feelings. Hannah, in turn, felt stifled by his overbearing demeanor, resenting his attempts to control her. "You're treating me like a child," she accused, her voice rising. "I'm not helpless, Silas. I can take care of myself." Silas's jaw tightened. "I'm just trying to protect you," he retorted. "These men are dangerous. They won't hesitate to kill. And I'm trying to protect you," Hannah shot back. "But you won't even let me help." The argument escalated, their unspoken feelings erupting in a torrent of frustration and fear. Silas accused Hannah of being reckless and naive, while Hannah accused Silas of being controlling and emotionally stunted. "Maybe this was a mistake," Hannah said, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "Maybe I should just leave. Go back to the city." Silas's face paled. "Don't say that," he pleaded, his voice low. "Don't leave me, Hannah." "Why not?" Hannah challenged, her eyes filled with tears. "You don't even need me. You were fine before I came along. You're better off alone." The words hung heavy in the air, a painful reminder of their initial agreement. Had their connection been nothing more than a practical arrangement, destined to crumble under the weight of their unspoken feelings and the pressures of the outside world? The threat of the approaching men had not only endangered their lives, but had also exposed the fragility of their budding romance, threatening to tear them apart. The misunderstanding stemming from fear jeopardized everything they had built. The silence that followed Hannah's outburst was deafening. The weight of their unspoken feelings and the looming threat pressed down on them, suffocating any possibility of reconciliation. Finally, Silas broke the silence, his voice low and filled with pain. "It's not true," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I do need you, Hannah. More than you know." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I know I'm not good at saying things," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm not used to feeling things. But you've changed everything, Hannah. You've brought light back into my life. You've shown me that it's possible to love again." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I was afraid," he confessed. "Afraid of getting hurt again. Afraid of losing you. That's why I was trying to protect you, why I was being so gruff." Hannah's heart softened at his words. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the raw emotion that he had kept hidden for so long. She realized that his gruffness was not a sign of indifference but a shield against the pain of the past. "I was scared too," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I was scared of being alone, of not being good enough, of never finding happiness." She stepped closer to him, her hand reaching out to gently touch his cheek. "But you've shown me that it's possible to find love in the most unexpected places," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "You've shown me that it's possible to heal, to forgive, and to start over." Silas reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I love you, Hannah," he whispered, his voice filled with tenderness. "I love you more than words can say." Hannah's heart soared at his words. She had waited so long to hear them, and now that they were finally spoken, they filled her with a sense of joy and peace she had never known before. "I love you too, Silas," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "I love you with all my heart." They embraced, their bodies wrapped tightly in each other's arms, finding solace and strength in their newfound love. The threat of the approaching men still loomed large, but now they faced it together, their hearts united, their spirits renewed. "We'll face them together," Silas said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll protect our home. We'll protect each other." Hannah nodded, her eyes shining with newfound resolve. "I'm not afraid," she declared. "Not as long as I'm with you." They spent the rest of the night preparing for the attack, their movements coordinated and efficient. They worked as a team, their love and commitment strengthening their resolve. As dawn approached, they heard the sound of horses in the distance. The men were coming. Silas and Hannah took their positions, their rifles loaded, their hearts pounding. They waited in silence, their eyes fixed on the approaching figures. The men, a rough and lawless bunch, surrounded the cabin, their faces hardened with greed and malice. They demanded that Silas hand over the gold they believed he possessed. Silas refused, his voice ringing with defiance. "There's no gold here," he declared. "Leave us in peace." The men, however, were not convinced. They opened fire, shattering the windows and peppering the cabin with bullets. Silas and Hannah returned fire, their shots accurate and deadly. They fought side by side, their love fueling their courage and their determination. The battle raged for hours, the cabin echoing with the sounds of gunfire and explosions. Silas and Hannah, outnumbered but not outmatched, fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. Finally, as the sun began to set, the tide turned. Silas and Hannah, with their combined skill and determination, managed to repel the attackers, driving them back into the wilderness. The cabin was battered and bruised, but it still stood. Silas and Hannah, exhausted but alive, emerged from the wreckage, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. They had faced death together, and they had survived. They had proven that their love was stronger than any threat, stronger than any hardship. They had chosen to embrace their love and build a life together in the wilderness, and they had emerged victorious. Their future was uncertain, but they knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. They would stay and rebuild. This was their home. Years passed. The scars of the battle faded, replaced by the warmth of a thriving home and a deepening love. The cabin, once a symbol of isolation, now stood as a testament to their resilience and their commitment to each other. The wilderness, once a source of fear and uncertainty, had become their sanctuary, their playground, and their provider. Hannah, no longer the city-bred mail-order bride, had transformed into a skilled and resourceful woman capable of surviving and thriving in the harsh environment. Silas, no longer the haunted loner, had found peace and happiness in Hannah's love. His gruffness had softened, replaced by a gentle warmth and a quiet contentment. He still carved wooden figures in his spare time, his hands creating beautiful works of art that reflected the beauty and the serenity of their life. The final scene unfolds on a bright spring morning. The air is filled with the scent of wildflowers and the sound of birdsong. Hannah stands in the doorway of the cabin, her belly swollen with child. She smiles as she watches Silas teaching a young boy how to set a snare. The boy, Jedediah's son, looks up at Silas with admiration and respect. Silas, in turn, smiles back, his eyes filled with pride. He has found a new purpose in life, a new way to honor the memory of his lost brother. Hannah walks over to Silas and wraps her arms around his waist, resting her head against his back. "They're beautiful," she whispers, referring to the wildflowers that Silas has planted around the cabin. Silas turns and looks at her, his eyes filled with love. "Not as beautiful as you," he replies, his voice soft and tender. He gently strokes her hair, his touch filled with affection. "I love you, Hannah," he says. "More than words can say." Hannah smiles, her heart overflowing with happiness. "I love you too, Silas," she replies. "Forever and always." They stand there,